arts-led and arts-informed approaches is Professor Peter O'Connor from University of Auckland. And he's going to talk to us about the different phases of recovery and how that acts on the process of restoration and healing. Thanks, Peter.
Nā rangatira e nā hoho ki tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I acknowledge this land and its suffering. I spend my life as a professor of education, but I'm really at heart a theatre maker. And so I find myself being invited to make theatre in different places. And the key part of that is to be invited rather than to show up. So thank you, Sue, so much for the invitation, because I wouldn't have come without one. And maybe there's a lesson in there. Come when you're asked. And when you come, once you've been asked, come and do everything you can. So thank you, Sue, for that invitation. I was invited to China in 2008 following the Sichuan earthquake. Not to work in schools, because that earthquake left some villages with no children, no schools left. And I worked there with theatre companies, not with the theatre companies who were doing the work and providing advice and support to them. I was invited to Christchurch and worked 10 days after the February earthquake, and was invited by teachers to come and work with them, and created work which meant they could use the arts in their schools rather than yet another arts team coming in to do the work. And 9 years later, I'm still working in Christchurch, and the talk of those 2 and 3 year olds at the time, who are now 11, 12 and 13-year-olds, the eastern suburbs of Christchurch, it's still like working in a war zone, and I've worked in those kinds of zones as well. The levels of anxiety, the levels of hurt that sit in part of the city that's been totally and completely abandoned by its government. I was invited to work in Mexico City after their disaster, in their huge deadly disaster earthquake in 2018, and worked with 150 artists as we worked our way through the most quake affected parts of the city. And then last year I was in Christchurch again, working with 2 teachers who had invited me to work with refugee and migrant students right at the very heart of where the terror attack had happened. So I'm really interested in an artist, sometimes working directly with students so that I can model the ways in which the arts might work, but working really, and I saw this very much with this initiative, how might I as a teacher, how might I as an artist support teachers, knowing that initial teacher education in our country and anywhere else in the world, I would imagine, doesn't prepare them for this at all. And I'm always guided by the notion of that teacher on the first day, Jane, that you talked about, trying to put everything in their own lives behind them to help those little ones in front of them. And what might they do? And they're scared to get it wrong. They're scared that they're going to cause more harm than do good. And how might we do that? I've been doing quite a bit of research as well, because I am an academic, and I've been looking at a range of different ways of understanding the arts post and during disaster, because we're not post-disaster, and Christchurch wasn't 13,000 aftershocks in 3 years, and your fire season has only just begun. And thinking of the arts as pathways, and one of the ways in which the arts act as pathways is that they help us to redirect ourselves from ourselves. And that's vitally important. And the work that I do and the work that I see teachers do, the importance of laughter, the importance of fun, of enjoyment, of doing that singing that you talked about, Jane, redirecting ourselves from ourselves, but redirecting ourselves to link with others as well. It's the way in which the arts bring us together in ways that nothing else can. That it's the way in which, if we think beyond redirecting, the arts also help us to remember that they are always the pathway to the past, to those who've gone before us, to remember that sometimes we are lucky to have survived and that we don't need to carry that guilt with us, that we are here when so much has been lost, that they provide the space for communal grieving safely. But perhaps most importantly for me, the arts allow us to reimagine, to see that this world that we are in does not have to be the world that will be, and that we can see ourselves through the arts, especially in participatory arts making, that we can be more than spectators to the world, that we can be active citizens, and the work that Lisa and Carol and I around the notion of children as citizens, as people who have a role to play in the recovery and rebuilding of the communities under threat, and that the arts in particular have that strength. And finally, the arts have a place to play in resistance, political resistance. One of the things which I know, and now it's not necessarily the time, but Naomi Klein will remind us that there's the damage of what nature does, but there's the damage of disaster capitalism. And I've seen that in every disaster zone I've worked in. That the natural disaster will do one thing and then government will make it worse. And that's the reality of every zone that I've been in. And the arts provide an opportunity to resist the narratives of government. When we worked in China, the stories that they eventually wanted to tell was not the stories of the earthquake, but was the stories of the fact that the Chinese government killed their children by building schools that weren't good enough. That in Christchurch, the stories that the arts and what the people in Christchurch want to tell is the story of the fact that the eastern suburbs were abandoned, worse than abandoned, kicked over by government. And I have a feeling that you have a resistance story to tell in this country as well, and the arts will do it. And schools will be part of telling that story as well. My most recent work in Christchurch pulls together all those aspects, those pathways. I was invited down by a teacher who, working with a group of young Muslim women who wanted to use dance to tell a particular story. The story was the wearing of the hijab. And the story that they wanted to tell was that that cloth that's worn, there's a tension between it being light and also enormously heavy, because once it's worn, it becomes a symbol and a target. How might you do that? You can do it through the arts in a way that's safe. You can do that through the arts, which is beautiful, challenging, and resistant. With the 5 and 6-year-olds that I went back and worked with for months, they created a process drama where we worked in Alice in Wonderland's world. Kids understand metaphor. They wanted to do a drama where we went to a world where you didn't really understand all the rules, that you were promised all sorts of things because it was Wonderland. But you know what? In Wonderland, there's a Queen of Hearts who wants to take your head off. So the children that we worked with used that metaphor to work out, how do you live in a world where there are queens of hearts? How do you make queens of hearts kind again? How do you let them know that you have value as a human? So thank you, Sue. Thank you for the opportunity to be here in your beautiful country. There's something about the banks here I discovered, and that's, it only flowers because of the stress of the heat. And the arts will flourish and flower in your schools, and they will remind us of the potential of joy and beauty. Thank you.